Can Smets do another double-header as he did last week? Oh, is it going to be somebody else? Well, they're away. Oh, Carol King.
Hey up everyone.
Up
Today's video is something a little different again. It's a story that involves idealistic engineers, corporate takeovers, industrial giants and betrayal, and the eventual death of a brand that was a shining light. So nothing new in the world of big industry, I guess. Husaberg is a name that means more to some than others, but I want to talk about their amazing achievements and the engineers who had a much bigger impact on the industry than they were ever given credit for. To understand the story, we have to go back to 1988, but even now, a lot is still shrouded in mystery, partly down to a lack of knowledge and simple geography, but also, to a certain extent, it's a history hidden by corporate giants who would like you to stay in the dark. The story starts in Sweden. Husqvarna had gained a reputation for their off-road motorcycles, but they were in trouble financially. The solution came in the form of Cagiva and the Castiglione brothers, who do seem to pop up somewhere in many of my videos. Cagiva were focused on racing. They were building a bike for the Paris-Dakar and saw the acquisition of Husqvarna as part of the puzzle. Cagiva had won the 125cc World Motocross Championship in 85 and 86 and come second in the 250cc class in 87. But they wanted to take on the Premier class, and Husqvarna engines were an obvious choice. What they didn't take into account was that not everybody wanted to move to Italy. Despite this, all the manufacturing was moved to Varese, but many of the engineers decided that they didn't want to leave Sweden. This moment would lead to the birth of two companies eventually, but for now, the complete engineering team led by Thomas Gustafsson left Husqvarna to set out on their own. Now these weren't businessmen, they were the core engineering staff, people with a passion for motocross who wanted to win the World Championship. They set to work on creating the greatest off-road motorcycle the world had ever seen. They built a prototype and took it to the local races, where they were asked the brand of the bike. Looking at each other confused, they explained there was no company name, that the bike was a prototype. The organisers explained they needed a name for the entry form. Husaberg was the name of the village where they'd built the motorcycle, and so the Husaberg company was born. Not focused on making money, focused on winning races. The motorcycles were physically big, but lightweight, and were so good that they managed to win 2 constructors' titles with the FE350 and FE501 models just a few years after the birth of the company. For any company, that would have been good, but for a tiny company with no financial backing, it was unbelievable. Funding for the company didn't actually exist, and the first factory was really a wooden shed. They couldn't afford to go out and spend money on established big-name riders to race their bikes, so they put their efforts into helping young up-and-coming riders and relied on the bike's performance to do the selling. Doing this gave some young riders who later became icons a way into the sport they would not have had otherwise. Getting back to the bikes, the main objective of the Husaberg design was minimising and centralising weight, and this was what they became known for. They built the lightest big-bore 4-strokes available at the time. The first engines were derived from the Husqvarna TE510 engine, but it was improved a lot by Husaberg. A shorter stroke changed the engine's characteristics, making it rev out much better and reach higher revs. They also pioneered the use of Nikasil liners in the barrels to minimise frictional loss. The frame had some innovative features too. Many years before anyone else tried to do it, they incorporated the airbox into the chassis. The airbox was built into an enlarged spine on the frame, which lowered weight and increased rigidity, while allowing cold air to be ducted from the steering head area directly to the carbs very quickly, instead of the bike trying to scavenge air from the central area of the bike, which was always hotter. Large intake ducts formed a ram air system of sorts, and this forced air into the airbox, increasing the internal pressure, so the cold, high-pressure air feed gave the field the chance to make more power, especially at higher speeds. All of the work was geared towards decreasing weight and increasing power. You see, whatever you might think of them, no one could ever say that the engineers at Husaberg weren't fantastic. They were masters of their art, and they brought some real innovations to the world of motocross with the bikes that they built. However, as with any new company, there were many things that would hinder their success. As I said, they weren't businessmen or salespeople, and they had no idea about marketing. They needed to set up a dealer network too, because they knew the motocross industry was a very parts-heavy sector of the market. Without spares, they knew that sales would always be limited. Cash flow became an issue, and internal arguments even caused the splits, with some of the engineers going on to form the fabled Highland Motorcycles Company, which you can hear more about in the Maverick Motorcycles video linked above. The core team struggled on, but with poor sales and a lack of dealerships, the writing was on the wall. The bikes were renowned for being built to an amazing standard, with unrivaled performance, but without a focused marketing team taking their products to the world, success on the racetrack could not be converted into sales. The only marketing idea that they ever came up with was a company slogan. You might just recognise it. The slogan was "Ready to Race." It was never a KTM slogan. It was Husaberg's. It was the whole principle behind which the company had been born. You see, KTM were not doing well, but they had been bought out by a big corporation called Piero Mobility in 1992. You can read more about that story in the video linked above. Piero Mobility were determined to revive KTM, and they knew they needed a big four-stroke engine. The easy solution was just to buy Husaberg, who was struggling financially but winning on the track. Then KTM simply stole the slogan and slowly began to rip the heart out of the Husaberg brand. Despite having their identity stolen, after the acquisition, the core team of engineers were allowed to continue to innovate and develop their products in Sweden. They had a clear focus on making the bigger engines they had even better and winning the Blue Ribbon 500cc title. There were still no funds for big-name pro riders, so they continued to rely on rookies, but one of those inexperienced young riders would go on to become one of the most successful riders of all times, riding a Husaberg. In 1995, Joel Smets won his first 500cc title, and over the next few years he won 3 out of 5 titles, coming in second and third in the others. No small achievement for a young rider and a tiny company based in rural Sweden. You can see some footage I've included, and I'll leave more at the end of the video. Changes were happening though. The Austrians had bought Husaberg for a reason. The engines were used to power several KTM models, and all the technology and innovations were made available to KTM as part of the deal. So little by little, the Austrian company chipped away at the identity of the Swedish company, taking their best ideas and painting KTM as the innovators, with little mention of the small Swedish company that were actually behind most of those innovations. Not KTM or Husqvarna, it was Husaberg who were the ones actually at the cutting edge of the sport and the industry. By 2003, KTM decided that both production and research and development were to be moved to its Austrian factory. The motorsport division was kept in Sweden, but separating the core engineers and race team from the production process was never going to work for Husaberg. A pattern was emerging. The Austrians had used the tech Husaberg provided to develop the RFS engines, but gave the Swedish company no credit for all the work they had done. In many ways, the Bergs were presented as rebadged KTMs, when in fact the exact opposite was more true. Husaberg were the innovators, and if you wanted the highest level of technology you could buy, then buy a Berg, not a KTM. The Bergs were renowned for their handling and the balance of the machines was all based on the innovative 70-degree engine design. It helped to create a motorcycle with a more central mass, a bike that didn't handle like anything else on the market. They had a whole new philosophy and developed a new way of building motorcycles in many ways. The bikes were built with passion, and the engine was powerful, but the lightness made the 450 handle more like the 350cc bikes of other companies. The only reason we don't see more of that 70-degree engine design used today is that it was simply more expensive to build. In the end, Husaberg was simply being used as a test bed for what would be later become KTM motorcycles. This period ended with the production of the FE390. This was the very last of the 70-degree engine platforms and brought mass centralisation to the world of motocross. The engine would go on to provide many of the improvements needed to make the 390 KTM engine what it is today. Then came the final nail in the coffin. Husqvarna had been passed from Cagiva to BMW, and eventually, in 2013, were bought out by Piera Mobility. Resurrecting the Husqvarna brand meant that the disgruntled engineers from when Husaberg first split from Husqvarna were sidelined again. As the more recognised brand, Husqvarna became the focus of Piera Mobility. In reality, however, both Husqvarna and Husaberg suffered, just in different ways. In 2014, on the 25th anniversary, the Husaberg brand was dissolved. The already successful Red-Top Husky engine was deconstructed, and any tech that had been beneficial was again incorporated into the new KTM designs. The benefits of the Husqvarna tech and the dissolving of the Husaberg name meant the Big Orange machine had little in the form of competition except for the big four Japanese companies, and they benefited from the years of top-level research and development put into creating the best motocross bikes possible, done by both Husqvarna and Husaberg. It's rare that an engineering team like the men who began Husaberg can win at this game just by having a great product. And it's sad how the team got sidelined time and time again. First when they were given the choice of leaving Husqvarna or moving to Italy. Then when they were forced to make the decision of moving to Austria or leaving the Husaberg company they had built from the ground up. Their revolutionary 70-degree engine got shut down, and many of their groundbreaking ideas were stolen. They were smart and innovative, but they seemed to pick the short stick every time when it came to the business world. So, Husaberg joined a long list of companies like Bultaco, Mako, Ossa, and Montesa, who were lost to the industry despite the fantastic products that they made. Some might have been reborn, but would never be the companies they once were. Now, Yamaha often get the credit for the birth of the use of four-strokes in motocross, but I'm going to say that first Husqvarna and then Husaberg built four-strokes that were more than capable of beating the two-strokes, long before Yamaha ever did. For that, they should be both commended and remembered. Not for building four-strokes to save the planet. They built four-strokes that were simply better than any other bikes. All we can do now is try to remember and celebrate the advances that Husaberg brought to the industry we all love, and possibly try and help and support anyone who has the chance to keep any of these fantastic bikes going for as long as possible. Do you have any personal experience about riding Husaberg motorcycles? Are you lucky enough to have owned or still own one? Let me know in the comments section. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to share the video with anyone you think might be interested too. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed it. You'll get regular updates, news and views every week from the world of motorcycles. Visit the website or the Red Bull shop linked in the description for the best biker t-shirts and other merchandise too. There are more exciting motorcycle adventures and other stories from the shed and beyond on the website, so why not grab a cuppa and take a look around. You won't be disappointed. Let me know in the comments what other subjects you'd like me to cover in these videos too. Thanks for watching. I hope you get some great riding in. Ride free everyone.
Can Smets do another double header as he did last week? Oh, is it going to be somebody else? Well, they're away. Oh, Carol King charging up the inside there on the Kawasaki. Then it's Trampers Parker, then Deep Marlacker number 71. Beginning to edge their way through. Christian Berner 19 just gone through. Unable to match the power of those big four strokes up front.